turn right.
Ready? Hey everyone, welcome to ECW Live. My name is Drew Buchanan. I'm with Councilwoman Sherri Myers. She's joining us today, and this is part 2 of our Walking Dangerously series with ECW Live. And today we're going to talk about, just how dangerous it can be to walk, to bike, to jog, to basically do anything in Pensacola without being in a car. For a long time, our culture here of designing roads and building roads has been about automobiles and how do we design for the automobile. When in reality, and I know Councilwoman Myers agrees with me, we should be designing roads that should be multimodal. In other words, they should be built for all users, pedestrian, bicyclists, and automobiles. Right. So today, I guess I wanted to introduce you. I'm kind of the moderator of sorts, and we want to talk about sidewalk issues. I know that's been a big thing for you. 9th Avenue, you represent the Uptown District, isn't that how you'd like to classify it? Which most people don't realize is the biggest economic hub in the city. It's not.
In the county.
It's kind of tied with downtown, but a lot of times y'all don't get the resources you need like downtown does. So I know a big push for you has been streetlights, Carpenter's Creek, and creating streets that are for all users, not just automobiles. So I know you have a presentation, but I want to just go ahead and introduce you and get the conversation started.
Right. Well, Drew, I grew up in a family that never owned a car. And my mother never owned a car, and she worked all of her life. We grew up walking and riding buses. And I had never been afraid to cross streets, and I've lived in some very large metropolitan areas, Washington, D.C., Louisville, Kentucky, Nashville, Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee. I have never been afraid to cross streets until I moved here.
Right.
And so, also for years I've represented people with disabilities as a legal aid attorney and then as the advocacy outreach coordinator for the Center for Independent Living here. And one of my primary missions has been to make streets safer for people with disabilities. And the Center for Independent Living here has done a lot of work on that issue, lots of work. So over the years, I have taken a lot of pictures, a lot of documenting the streets in Pensacola, downtown, in the county, all over. And so we have had some really good successes, though, working with the state of Florida and the city of Pensacola to make certain streets safer and accessible for people with disabilities. So if you design streets for all users, and I mean all abilities,
right,
you will be designing streets that are safe for everyone and usable. So if we have that mindset that it's called universal design. So we're designing for all users and all abilities. We will have a much safer environment and save a lot of lives.
Right. So on the aspect of saving lives, interestingly today, Smart Growth America, which is a nonprofit group that's nationwide, that focuses on building smart communities, smart streets. They released a report today that shows, once again, Florida is the #1 state for pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities and injuries. And that's, once again, that's a #1 you don't want to be #1 at. And in Escambia County, we're one of the worst counties in the state of Florida, which is the worst state in the country. So that really doesn't put us in a good light. It showed that the average fatality rate in Florida is 2.23 people per 100,000. So which means odds are at least 2 people are going to die per 100,000 within the state. But in Escambia County, it's 7.76, more than triple the state average of the worst state in the country. So this is very topical right now because this is such a big issue. We haven't had at least in the city of Pensacola, a homicide, thankfully, because of our police officers. and our overall crime rate is low. But the number one public safety issue is pedestrian and bicyclist safety. So, I think you'd agree that this needs to be much more serious, taken seriously by the public and by the local government.
Right, and I will tell you that as an older person, it takes me maybe longer to get across the street. Also, if I'm hit by a car, even just a little bit, a car that's going very slow, because I'm older, it will do a lot more damage to me. And I've had to give up. I live two blocks from my vet, but I have to cross Creighton Road to get there. I'm not going to cross Creighton Road on foot, so I have to drive there. I used to ride the ECAT bus to work until Davis Highway was widened. So now I can't ride the bus because I have to cross 6 lanes of Davis Highway, and there's no safe area for pedestrians. If you get halfway across the street and the hand signal changes, well, then you've got to run. So so there are a lot of things that we need to do, and some things are easy to do to make streets safer. Street lights, for one, we can definitely put street lights in areas that are dark. So, while the Americans with Disabilities Act makes streets safer and accessible for people with disability, there's still a lot of issues that we have to look at in terms of design. For instance, I almost had a collision with a pedestrian today. He was in a crosswalk. He had the light. I also had the light, but I also was turning right on red. Right on red. I mean, I could turn right because I had the green light. But right turns seem to be problematic, whether you're turning right on red or whether you're turning right on green. I started thinking about this today as I almost collided with that pedestrian, why I didn't see him. I decided it's because of the way my SUV is designed. Has a lot to do with it. So, these issues can be very nuanced, but we need to look at everything that we can possibly look at.
So, speaking of treating this seriously, I know you have a presentation that you wanted to go over that talks about normally sidewalks are this fun amenity we want in front of our house for recreation, but it's more than that. It's a civil right. So I'll let you kind of talk about the presentation and go into it and just how important this is.
The presentation is one that I put together when I worked at the Center for Independent Living, and we showed this PowerPoint on July the 26th of last year when we had our ADA awareness walk. So basically, the federal courts have ruled that sidewalks are a civil right. If there's an existing sidewalk, it has to be usable by people with disabilities, and it has to be designed a certain way. I think you could make the argument about roads when you have a lack of lighting that prohibits people, or the lack of lighting can be a barrier for people to be able to access roads, even in a car, like older people who have to have more illumination on a street. So I think you could probably take that same argument and apply it to roads and as well as sidewalks. But anyway, if you'd like, we can quickly go through this.
Absolutely. We can kind of just talk about it as you go through the slides.
Okay. So this slide presentation is in memory of Bobby CROMPTON, and he is downtown on Government Street. He and I often went downtown and surveyed streets, and as you can see, this is a beautiful streetscape here.
I know exactly where that
flowers.
is too.
Yes, but the problem is it creates a barrier for a person who uses a wheelchair or a walker or who has low vision. So anyway, I thought this was a wonderful picture. We had a great time that day, and so anyway, I dedicated this to him. So let's think about, what is a sidewalk? Well, it's a conduit for pedestrian movement and access.
Right. That's a scientific way of putting it, but
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the simplified way.
So why sidewalks? Why do we need sidewalks? You may have some other ideas to add to this, but I put to connect to the community, connect to businesses, connect to vital needs such as medical, hospitals, for instance, or just medical facilities, connectivity to education, connectivity to emergency management and relief, connection to recreation, walking, and exercise. And I got this list kind of from thinking about my own district. You know, we have a state college in Uptown, we have Sacred Heart Hospital, and so we also have a lot of businesses. So people who live close to Uptown without, say, a mile, mile and a half, or 2 miles, they can actually walk if we have walkable environment that's safe, and riding bicycles. And as you know, on 9th Avenue, that's kind of hard to do, to ride a bicycle.
Right, absolutely.
Even when you have sidewalks. So, sidewalks and civil rights. Americans with Disabilities Act. This is what it says. It applies to states and local governments and any program, whether public or private, that receives state or local government funds. Programs must be usable by people with disabilities. The operative word here is usable, as in use able. So able to use. Also, there are other federal laws that apply to the federal government. And 504 of the Rehab Act of 1973 was the first act that requires that programs funded by federal funds are accessible and usable by people with disabilities.
Right.
The difference between the 1973 Act is that it only applied to the federal government. The ADA applies to states and local governmental entities. So also, Florida Constitution Article 1 Section 2 states that people with physical disabilities are a protected class, and this applies to all governmental entities and recipients of state funds in the state of Florida. So the Florida Constitution prohibits discrimination based on disability, physical disability. That means the government has to show a compelling state interest in denying people with physical disabilities equal access.
Right.
So how do we enforce these civil rights laws? Well, the design standards are enforced by the U.S. Department of Transportation, the United States Access Board, the Florida Department of Transportation, and the Florida Building Code standards for accessible design. And that would be enforced at the local government level.
Right.
So here are some agencies that do enforcement. The Federal Highway Administration. And by the way, the Federal Highway Administration has been down here to Escambia County based on a complaint that I and another lady made regarding bus stops in Escambia County. And actually the feds came down here and they met with the Escambia County officials, and they said that you have to do an inventory of all of your sidewalks, all of your facilities, your bus stops, everything. And if you don't, the county could risk funding. Also, the Florida Department of Transportation guidelines cover new construction. The local government has enforcement powers. So it can also be enforced in federal courts and state courts. So there are numerous ways of enforcement. I think I mentioned the U.S. Justice Department. So
So these are some good photos you got coming up here.
Yes, and all of these photos are in downtown within a block of City Hall.
Which is so ironic.
And these are not usable. They are unusable. And we have sidewalks that are all cracked up. You can see on the left side, we're lacking a curb cut there. And again, these sidewalks are unusable. As you can see, there's vegetation growing in them. You can see there's vegetation growing over the sidewalk. You can see over here on the right-hand slide that we have a curb cut that goes to a sidewalk. And by the way, I believe this is the sidewalk that goes to the Maritime Park. It may be on de Villiers.
I think that's de Villiers in Zaragoza.
Yeah, I had another slide that identifies these streets, but I couldn't get to it very easily. But we're really interested in the pictures.
Sidewalk.
This one
Where the sidewalk ends.
Yeah, this one is over here. This is downtown. This is on de Villiers. And you can see that the sidewalk ends. So this is very problematic in the older parts of, well, it's problematic all over, like we saw on 9th Avenue, you know.
So Sherri, why does that happen? So for instance, that last slide, for people just watching and wondering, you know, how does it happen where a sidewalk just stops?
You know, I'm going to say this. This community is fairly typical of communities in the older part of the city. This is in the Tanyards. And I think that in a way I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is about systemic racism.
Sure.
And low-income communities. It really is. I look at the condition of the streets and the sidewalks and the Tanyards along de Villiers Street in particular. They're unconscionable.
Well, I think that's an argument to be made, because if you go to a place like Cordova Park, which is largely white and affluent, that's not really the case. You're not going to find sidewalks that are deteriorated largely or ending, whereas the Tanyard, either one, they don't exist because the city never built them, or two, they're poorly maintained. And I used to live there, and I can tell you that's 100% the case. Either the right-of-way wasn't maintained by the city, or repairs weren't made by the city. I think that's changing,
right?
But I think that is part of it.
Well, as people moved out into the suburbs, the inner city was forgotten about.
Right, right.
And so we see evidence of that even downtown. Now we're on a downtown street here, and you can see, I'm thinking this may be Romana Street. This is downtown though, and this is, I believe, on Romana Street. It may be on Government Street, but you can see that there are things here in the sidewalk that are blocking Bobby's access to the sidewalk. And I'm sure this is the corner of Romana and Balin here on the right.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, we have a severe slope here because the sidewalk disappears and you have a parking lot. So it's making it difficult, plus it's all cracked up. You can see the cracks and everything. So it's making it difficult for Bobby to navigate. Now this is one of my favorite spots in downtown.
I know exactly where that's at too.
And let me tell you what, the idea that we should build buildings right next to sidewalks, unless that sidewalk is 10 or 15 feet wide, I say don't do it.
I think that's the key, is if you're going to build a building on a sidewalk, which can be good, you better make sure the sidewalk is wide enough. And then I'm sure you're going to point out there's a pole sticking out.
There is a pole, and there's a lack of visibility. Whether you're driving or walking or however you're navigating on a bicycle, it's hard to see around that building there. And the problem is that building is not going to be moved.
Right. So the
So-
sidewalk has to be.
So how do we make that sidewalk bigger? It's going to be very difficult to do. We could narrow the lanes, but you've only got 2 lanes here, so,
That's one option.
so maybe we can go and measure it and see how wide it is.
Right.
But, this is why I'm against vacating large chunks of right-of-way.
Mm-hmm.
We have got to decide what is our maximum desirable sidewalk design and what is our minimal. And so hopefully this is something the city council is dealing with also. As you know, we passed an ordinance that requires sidewalks to 10 feet of right-of-way be preserved
Right.
anytime we're vacating a right-of-way, so we don't run into situations like this. Now, this is typical all over garbage cans. This is owned by the city of Pensacola. Not picking on the city of Pensacola, because garbage cans in the county that are ECUA cans are problematic too. But this is a barrier to sidewalk users here.
And so the thing with trash cans, they're city property, but they're maintained, quote unquote, by residents. Should they be placed in the street instead? So, for instance, I would never place my can on the sidewalk because I'm a stickler when it comes to stuff being in my way. Does the law say anything about whether locally or federally or whatever the trash cans or recycling cans should be in the street?
I think this is the responsibility of the city to regulate this, because it is their cans. This can could actually be over there on the grass. It looks like possibly there is a driveway there it could also be placed on. But one place it can't be, and that's where it is right now. And the thing is, when the sanitation drivers, they will place the can right back where it was.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an issue when we do our complete street ordinance that we need to address.
Yeah, and actually everyone gets a trash bill, so whenever if we do create a regulation on it, it could just be an education campaign that you receive in your bill saying don't put it in the sidewalk.
Do you know that ECUA has sent out 3 or 4 flyers to their customers telling them they cannot place cans on the sidewalk, and you know what? They're still placing them on sidewalks. And they will continue to do so until they start receiving fines.
Right.
But I brought this issue before ECUA, and they jumped right on it.
That's good.
And so, in spite of all of their good efforts, we're obviously going to need more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is, I believe, Goulamard Street. That's another one of my favorite streets that's been neglected for years, and it probably at one time became a low-income area. Now it's coming back,
Mm-hmm.
People are wanting to renovate these older homes.
Long Hollow.
But look at the slope. Yes, this is in the Long Hollow area of that sidewalk, how it's all cracked up.
I've walked this before. I had to go in the street.
Yes, and look at the sidewalk. I mean, it's not usable even by an able-bodied person,
Right.
much less a person with a disability, with low sight, somebody uses a wheelchair or crutches. But this is I'm pretty sure this is Goulamard Street.
Yes, that is. Yes, I can tell.
So this is still on Goulamard Street. We can see the lack of a curb cut on the left side. Now, this is one of my great concerns here. This has to do with drainage. This drainage problem here on the right side is a violation of the ADA because it imposes a barrier for a person using a wheelchair. This is standing water and a curb cut.
Right.
So the city has an obligation to make sure that drainage does not sit in curb cuts and that curb cuts are clear of debris and so forth. Now you could argue, well, the property owner is responsible for making sure that debris isn't on sidewalks, but the property owners are not responsible for poor drainage.
Yeah.
So that's something that the city needs to do an inventory of. Again, that's Goulamard Street on the left, and as you can see, that is all broken up and has a severe slope to it. Now this sidewalk here is horrendous on the right.
Right.
This sidewalk is on De Villiers, right around the corner from Everman's. And this sidewalk, the reason it is completely gone, it's all cracked up. That water has probably been there for days. When the water evaporates, it's just cracked mud and cracked, concrete. The problem with this street, one of the problems is drainage.
Mm-hmm.
Over the years, with all the resurfacing, the curbs have gone away.
Right.
And we see this all over the downtown urban core area, is the absence of curbs due to bad resurfacing. This is another downtown. I think this is over close to, maybe if I put my glasses on I could see it.
I know it. Yeah,
I
that
think
is
it's
government.
either
Yeah.
it could be Government Street. And Club Street, I think, is the cross street. But you can see on the left this vegetation barrier to access. On the right, we have, this is across the street from the new Government Street pond.
Right.
And you can see that the sidewalk disappears. This is all over that area. So this is an interesting situation here. You can see on the right that there is a curb cut. The city put that curb cut there. It's not at the end of the street. It's kind of back away from the crosswalk and the intersection there. The problem with this type of curb cut in the middle of the sidewalk, it creates a real hazardous condition for people who use wheelchairs, for pedestrians, and the slide on the left-hand side shows you an example, and this is from the Federal Highway Administration's manual on, ADA, designing sidewalks for ADA. So Bobby's pointing out that how dangerous it is. You can see that his scooter is sloping, and if you were a pedestrian walking, you might fall off of that street because of that curb cut there. So that's the wrong kind of curb cut. There needs to be another solution to that, and there is a solution, by the way. Now, here are some resources for people who want more information about this. It's the Federal Highway Administration, the Florida Department of Transportation, United States Access Board, and the 2012 Florida Accessibility Code. So I just wanted to briefly state that the federal courts have unanimously pretty much said that sidewalks are a service of a municipality, and therefore they have to be usable by people with disabilities. So if they are designed according to the ADA standards of accessible design, the federal highway standards, the state of Florida standards, then they're going to be usable by people with disabilities. Lawsuits are being filed all over this country against cities and municipalities over sidewalks.
Right.
And in this case, Willits versus City of Los Angeles case recently reached a $1 billion settlement.
Wow.
They were sued by a group of people with disabilities, wheelchair users, and they settled that case for $1 billion. And the city over the next 30 years will spend that much improving their sidewalks. So Also, the Center for Independent Living Disability Resource Center is a great resource. Also, so is Sherri Myers.
That's right. I was just going to say.
So anyway, that's the end of my PowerPoint.
So thank you for sharing that. For even for me and for people that aren't familiar with what goes on behind building a sidewalk and maintaining it, or using it as a disabled person, I think that's really eye-opening to see that this isn't just suggested; it's required by law.
Right, and if we get sued, we're going to end up spending a lot more money. We do not allocate enough money for sidewalks in the city or the county.
Yeah.
But if we should get sued, we're going to have to come up with the money to address these ADA issues.
Well, and I know the city has claims every year that we don't know the amounts, although I'm sure we could request it, but they have to settle with people that trip or become disabled because of sidewalks. So I think when you ask about, well, how do we justify spending so and such money? Well, you do it by saying, one, you're going to reduce the cases of being sued and settlements and having to settle those with citizens. And then two, even if you're not a user for a sidewalk, I think everyone would agree that when you build them in front of homes or businesses, just as you would with bike lanes too, and nice complete streets, that it improves the quality of life and the economic activity, even if you don't use them, because more people are going to want to invest on a road that is more walkable, bikeable,
Right.
and livable, versus, for instance, we're right on Barrancas Avenue, and you may be able to hear the traffic, but I'd say people are going a good 40 to 50, sometimes 60 miles an hour every minute, and this is a 35-mile-per-hour road.
Well, you can generally, depend on people going maybe 10 miles over the speed limit. So,
Yeah.
but, so many state roads impact the city of Pensacola. And we have got to have leadership in the city of Pensacola. FDOT will do things for us if we ask them. And the problem is, we're not asking them. Look at 9th Avenue. The reason I'm going to continue holding a lot of town hall meetings on 9th Avenue is because we need to come up with a plan for 9th Avenue, and we need to go to FDOT and say, look, these are the things we need on 9th Avenue. Now, some things are going to be long range, but putting street lights up is a no-brainer. And the city can do that. The city has street lights on state roads.
Right.
Guess what? Some neighborhoods have gotten left out.
Yeah.
And the FDOT reimburses us for street lights that we maintain on state roads. So, I would start with prioritizing things that we can accomplish very quickly, like street lights. And
Well, I know, I just happen to have this in front of me. It's the 2018 Florida-Alabama TPO, Transportation Plan Organization Pedestrian and Master Plan. That's a mouthful. But this prioritizes what we need to do, and I'm sure there's more, but the problem we often run into in the city, and I'm sure in the county, is we always have these studies and we have the priorities in front of us, but there's not enough willpower at the local level to actually fund them and get them done. And I think you've shown that these don't have to be very expensive fixes. Streetlights, just putting new light bulbs in that are LED, are very inexpensive. Restriping a road so it's, instead of 12 feet wide for a vehicle lane, which is an interstate standard, how about we downscale it to 11 or 10 feet? This is just paint.
Right.
And then sidewalks is just concrete.
Right.
So I don't think they have to be expensive fixes, but like you said, I don't think anyone, for a long time, we haven't done a very good job of asking FDOT, hey, this is what Pensacola, this is what Escambia needs. And I think that's beginning to change, but we have a lot more ways to go with that.
Right, and also I would like to look at what streets we could implement a no turn on right.
Right.
and see what's involved in doing that. We have some streets in Pensacola where you can't turn right on red. I would like to see more streets that have that prohibition, and don't know what the law is, how we can go about doing it. Most of them are going to be on state roads, so that's something else that could probably be implemented. Shouldn't cost any money to implement that. I think we need to prioritize, sidewalks within a 2-mile radius of every school,
Mm-hmm.
of every community center, of every commercial core. We have a number of commercial cores here, downtown, uptown,
Right.
Eastgate Mall area, so let's look at where our pedestrian traffic is. We have a lot of military young men and women who come to uptown, and they're having to cross these horrible dark streets. So we need to I don't think we need to take long to do an assessment.
No, yeah.
And I'm going to ask the council to fund another streetlight study, because the streetlight study that we allocated $45,000 for, I was led to believe that it included the entire city. I didn't know it only included 13% of our lights, and those are on city roads.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know what? How about the other,
Right.
85%? I mean, they're state roads. That's an incredible number of lights, or lights that are needed on state roads.
Right.
So but if FDOT is not hearing from us, they're not going to help us. I've talked to FDOT officials about the lighting problems here, and they keep telling me, well, if the city wants streetlights, we'll be glad to put streetlights in, and the city has to agree to maintain them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are we waiting for?
Sure, absolutely.
So, anyway, I'm looking forward to having a complete street committee.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to have a lot of input. I would like to have some good diversity on the complete streets. We need, to get that up and moving as quickly as possible. In my opinion, I've been working on it for 8 years, and one thing after another has interfered with moving it forward. But maybe it's good that it's occurring now.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have a better complete streets, or a better concept of what we want as a community than we would have had, 7 or 8 years ago.
I think the culture has definitely changed from, let's say, 10 years ago from today. Even when I ran for elected office, I didn't plan for this, but much of my platform was revolving around pedestrian bicyclist safety. I became known as the bicycle boy a little bit. And I'm an amateur bicyclist. I don't bike professionally. But I like to, wherever I go, I like to see if I can bike there. And unfortunately, in most of Pensacola, and by far the most of Escambia County, it is not safe to bike or walk at all. So I think the culture's there that this will change, and people are starting to understand not everything is the pedestrian and bicyclist's fault. Some blame can be spread all across the board, but we have to get away from this mindset that people aren't allowed in roads, only cars are. And I think once we do that, we'll reach that point where we can say it's a success, but we have a long way to go.
When I read in the paper about a pedestrian being run over, killed on Pace or Cervantes or wherever, 9th Avenue, and I see a comment like, they weren't in a crosswalk. Really?
Mm-hmm.
Really? Have you driven down Pace?
Yeah. Well,
Have you driven down 9th Avenue? Where are these crosswalks? How far does a person have to go to get to a crosswalk? We need to slow traffic down in urbanized areas, slow it down. I've come up with this theory that fast traffic is bad for economic development, and this is how I can prove that. Look at Cervantes Street. from Davis to 9th Avenue. Not Cervantes, Creighton Road.
Great.
I mean, it is a freeway. And do you know what? When I'm on Creighton Road, which is 2 blocks from my house, and I'm on there every day, I couldn't tell you what businesses are there.
Because they're a blur when you go
Because
by.
they are a blur. Now, let me tell you one of the great accomplishments, though. I don't know if I had anything to do with it or not, but I've been advocating it for years. Is FDOT putting that crosswalk at Lanier and Creighton. Fabulous.
Mhm.
Well, guess what? That guy that I almost hit today,
Mhm.
he was in one of those crosswalks.
Oh wow.
And I mean, and I'm thinking, you know, it was so beautiful to see somebody walking the street in a safe environment, and yet it wasn't, you know, it wasn't safe.
Yeah.
What is it, the design of my vehicle? I mean, I'm really struggling with this in my mind today, trying to figure that out, because I really advocated for that, you know,
Yeah.
and I'm so
I think-
proud of that intersection. And this guy was in that intersection, and I almost hit him.
I think crosswalks are just one piece of the puzzle. It's all about redesigning. You know, we say complete streets, but I like to say complete communities. So it doesn't end with the road, it doesn't end with the crosswalk. It goes beyond that.
I'm wondering if we should be looking at signalization in terms of the timing.
Mhm.
When the light, when a pedestrian gets the hand signal, at the same time, I have the signal and I can turn right. So that puts us together in a bad situation. What if the pedestrian got a signal and I don't get, and the right turn driver doesn't get a signal as quick? But I mean, it just it bothers me. And
A lot of people
it's-
say we should get rid of the signals entirely because it creates a sense of false safety. And
I don't believe that.
And the reason that is a valid argument long term, I think, is because there should never have to be a signal to cross a road. The road should allow you to cross at
Well,
any safe time.
I'm also looking at the design of vehicles.
Yeah.
That article I sent you today got those wheels kind of
A
turning.
little bit bigger task, but yeah.
But well, I was driving an SUV. I do have a smaller car, but I was driving the SUV, and I've always been bothered by the blind spots
Yeah.
that are in that car, because it's a bigger vehicle and it has bigger blind spots. So I started looking at how can we design SUVs, and the problem is where the mirror is, the side mirror. And so perhaps that's something that needs to be looked at from auto manufacturing. But
Sure.
anyway, it's just we have an unsafe environment, and even when we have things in place to make it safer. But I am definitely not in favor of not having signalization.
Well, that's a long-term goal.
You
is
know, you
long-term,
really have to change the culture
Yeah,
here
yeah.
and the design of roads. Slowing traffic down, doing away with right turn on. Well, if you didn't have any signals, you wouldn't have right turn on red.
That's right. Well, I want to say thanks, Sherri, for going over all this with us. I'm sure, I don't know how many viewers we had, but I'm sure it was a lot of eye-opening facts and figures. Were there any final questions or anything
From the audience out there,
Cool. Well,
all 2 of our audience members.
oh no, people will watch it. So thanks everyone for joining us. This is part 2 of the Walking Dangerously series on ECW Live. But I appreciate everyone tuning in, and thanks again, Sherri.
Great, thanks. It was a great opportunity.
Thank you.